last year, the US and a handful of other countries approved the very first gene therapy treatment for sickle cell disease. The results in the trials were very, very, very good, essentially clearing the disease with like a 3-year follow-up, something like that. Of course, prohibitively expensive for many, but the insurance companies in the US have agreed to cover it. And the first commercial patient just started his treatment as a 12-year-old boy in Washington. He said that he hopes that he'll be cured from sickle cell, so that he can grow up and become a geneticist, which I almost cried the first time I read that. It was just so sweet.
Are these therapies different than like the immunotherapies? I mean, these are like really even more specifically targeted.
They basically go in and they like cut off the part of, this is a very non-scientific explanation, but they cut off the part of the gene that's like producing or doing something that it shouldn't be doing.
Well, add to the incredibly long and sometimes complicated list of scientific breakthroughs that have led to medical breakthroughs that are leading to less and less of the diseases that will kill us. We're recording this right during Trumpanelia. You know, it's somehow not nearly as exciting to talk about the 12-year-old being cured of sickle cell than it is to be listening to what Stormy Daniels has to say about whatever sexual peccadillos the once and maybe next president of the United States had to offer her.
Yeah, I mean, the treatment is so involved with Zero that right now very small numbers of people can access it, which is one reason why it's not kind of plastered all over the news. Another reason is like a social justice issue because sickle cell, it only really strikes people of color. So the lack of funding over sickle cell was an issue for a really long time. And it's another reason why this is exciting, where not only is it like could basically be a cure, but and using really cool scientific stuff to do it. So over time, it could lead to increasingly ubiquitous treatments and put the millions of people with sickle cell disease on much better footing for their lives.
What else have you got for us in your bag of news tricks?
Let's talk about how rich millennials are now.
Ooh.
Finally, good economic news about millennials.
A lot of millennials just threw something at the wall when they heard that. You know, rich millennials, my ass. What are you talking about? I'm not rich.
Essentially, and they're not wrong, right? So the Center for American Progress did this analysis of the post-COVID economy, which we've talked about on this podcast. And they tracked back wealth for Americans under 40, from 2000 and previous. And it really is a sad chart. It's just stagnant and then drops during the recession around 2010. And then it starts climbing back up, but it's kind of anemic. Doesn't get to the wealth that we had around 2000. Until 2019. And then in 2019, the chart just jumps like an astonishing and fast amount. So the Center for American Progress found that wealth for Americans under 40 actually has seen a 50%, almost 50% increase since 2019. And it's the fastest recovery from a recession or an economic crisis, let's say, the pandemic, that they've ever seen. So we are much, much wealthier in the last, let's say, 4 years than we have been for the last 2 decades, specifically if you're under 40.
I'm sure there are millennials listening to this going, oh, give me a break. That is just ridiculous. What are you talking about? Those numbers are wrong. And even if they're right, it so doesn't correlate with my experience. So I don't know what you're talking about. And it's going to be, that's part of the challenge of the Biden campaign in 2024 to say on the one hand that these numbers are really good, but vast numbers of people under the age of 30 are absolutely convinced that the economy is terrible. Whatever the economy means, their economy, their job prospects, their ability to own a home, all the things that people measure the economy by in terms of their lived experience.
I did get into an argument with at least one newsletter subscriber about this news. So the reaction that you are predicting is probably correct. But I don't know. It's what the data says. And I should caveat that this was an average. This is average wealth. They did look at the data and sort of see if it also held true for median, basically making sure that a small number of really rich millennials weren't throwing the data off. And they found that, yes, these gains were broadly distributed. So
we're just reporting the facts as they are. We're not trying to report the feelings as they are experienced. Please let us know, regardless. Absolutely. Send us your woes, your angers, and your general discontent.
Oh, please don't. So last but not least, send us your woes, just don't direct them at me personally. Last but not least, this is interesting because I've never seen it before. I mean, maybe readers or listeners rather will know other countries that do this, but the Australian government, after a pilot program, is now making this a generalized government program. They are pledging up to 1,500 Australian dollars in cash and 3,500 in goods and services to help women leave situations of domestic abuse. I was like, interesting. Lots of critics, particularly people saying that when they apply for the program, it's much too hard to get approved, and how much of that is like really reaching people at the end of the day. All questions, but I was interested in the fact that it exists in the first place.
You wouldn't want to have to go through hoops to prove that you're being abused. Like, that would be, I think, pretty humiliating and almost reliving the trauma experience.
Yeah.
Every government program is open to manipulation by bad actors who would take advantage of it, right? Meaning they aren't suffering at all from domestic violence. They just want to get the money. And so it's understandable that governments want to establish some criteria whereby you have to demonstrate that you are eligible for this. I don't know a way around this. I guess one of the ways around it would be you accept that some people will take advantage of the program, but that's the price to pay to help a lot of people who will be saved by it. It's easy to say, look, we should do this. It's hard to implement it. Unless you are, in fact, willing to go, look, a certain amount of fraud that will happen is worth it. It's worth it for a few bad actors in order to make it possible to help a lot of people. That's probably where I would come down. I think people obsess too much over, oh my God, 10 people took advantage of this program, but in the meantime, you helped 100 women, right, who otherwise wouldn't have had it. I don't see why that's not a trade-off that's acceptable. But people do tend to get really agitated by it. Like, oh my God, I can't believe we did this government program and people scammed us. But in the meantime, you helped all these people. So
it was a pilot program, so it was very small. So we'll see if like a more general rollout, they're probably going to fix some of the things that went wrong in the pilot program, I would assume.
All right. Thank you for being with us again for this week. We will be back next week with another What Could Go Right. Clearly, this is a world where people remain pretty fixated on all that is going wrong. And truly, there's a lot that is going wrong, and you can spend a lot of your time fixating on it. But we hope that these conversations at least add a different element, a different tone to the daily news diet that we are all subject to, and makes us think a little more about what is possible for the better and not just what is possible for the worst. So thank you for listening. Thank you, Emma. Send us your thoughts. Again, not personally directed at Emma or me, but do send us your thoughts, complaints, concerns, questions, and we will do our best to integrate them and address them in a conversation. So talk to you next week.